What is happening, party people? Welcome to Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Each week we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated Classic servers. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and this is a show where it's not my opinion on World of Warcraft that counts, but yours. If you're new to the show, Countdown to Classic goes through your expert input on everything relating to the sure-to-be amazing World of Warcraft Classic. Today, I am so happy to bring you a conversation that I had been hoping for since the show started. As many of you know, I am quite the sports fan, and so it had always been a plan to try to get a current or former professional athlete who had spent some time with World of Warcraft on Countdown to Classic for an in-depth interview. And this is that very episode, as I'm about to play you an extensive chat that I had over the weekend with former Minnesota Vikings punter Chris Kluwe, who was kind enough to cut out a couple of hours from his schedule to talk WoW, raiding, eSports, Blizzard, and a little football with me as well, and I'm so grateful to Chris for that time. After that, we'll go through regular show segments, anger management and memory lane, and then a bit of listener feedback to close things out. If you're enjoying these in-depth conversations that Countdown to Classic brings you on a regular basis, please do visit the show's Patreon page to see how you can help support Countdown to Classic continue to bring you more of the content that you're now so used to hearing on the show. Alternatively, you can also help the show out by mentioning the show to a friend, perhaps in-game. Talk about what you hear on Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, or wherever you're actively discussing things. Follow me on Twitch at Countdown to Classic, or leave the show a review on iTunes. If you want to hit me up with some feedback or submit a memory lane or anger management of your own, you can always hit me up at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com as well. And if you can't get enough of me for some reason, then please do also check out my other podcast, The Cinephiles. That's SINNERFILES.com if you haven't already, for great comedic takes on all your favorite movies. We've got our take on Ghost coming up this week, just when you thought you'd had enough Swayze after our Roadhouse episode, which got a lot of positive feedback. So check that one out too if you haven't already. But with all that said, let's get to former NFL star Chris Kluwe in today's in-depth interview. All right, it's time for another Countdown to Classic interview, and today I'm very excited to be speaking with a person who a lot of you may know, and it's been a goal of mine since the show began to get a professional athlete or a former professional athlete on the show. And I'm so happy today to be speaking with former NFL punter Chris Kluwe. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. It's it's going to be a fun time.
Absolutely, mate. Look, we've had the opportunity to shoot the shit for about half an hour before this recording started, and it's already sparked up a million questions that I'd love to ask you, and I'm sure the listeners will have some things that they'd love to know from you as well. But how I generally do things here is I just want to set up a little bit of a bio about you. Now, I've told people, obviously, yes, you played in the NFL. Many people may have seen you already on their televisions on Sundays a few years ago while you were rolling around with the Minnesota Vikings. But
well, hold on. I have to interrupt.
Yeah.
As the punter, they were probably going to the bathroom at that time, as opposed to watching me kick the ball to the other team.
Maybe you've sparked off some kind of Pavlovian response in people where they see your face and they're like, I have to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, I really got to pee right now.
But obviously outside of and we'll go through a bit of football chat later on, but outside of your exploits on the football field, if people aren't aware, you are a huge World of Warcraft fan amongst other sort of hobbies that we'll touch on as well. So tell us what you can about your just very, very briefly, a bit of a bio about you in World of Warcraft.
Okay, so me in World of Warcraft, I initially started playing in oh man, it would have been 2001, I think, either late 2000 or 2001. One of my friends from growing up, like through junior high school, he had told me about a game. Up to that point, like I'd been playing other MMOs. So started with Ultima Online, then moved on to EverQuest, then moved on to Dark Age of Camelot. And eventually he was like, hey, you should check out this game. It's made by Blizzard. It's called World of Warcraft. It's really, really cool. And it took me about 3 or 4 months to actually try the game out. But once I started playing World of Warcraft, I was like, wow, you're right. This game is really, really cool. So I started playing on the Horde because Horde are best. Sorry, all you Alliance listeners. We were massively outnumbered, so that made Horde better. But yeah, no, I was playing as a troll rogue, and that was back when trolls were not very good. So the main reason I picked a troll as my character because they were the tallest race. And I was like, well, I'm tall. I should pick the tall character class. Mm-hmm. And, but yeah, so no, started playing, vanilla WoW, leveled up, got to somewhat in game and, yeah, mainly was just kind of dicking around and, playing with my friends. Until right around the end of vanilla, like beginning of Burning Crusade, where I was like, I really want to try raiding seriously because the guild that I was in, we'd done 40-man Molten Core. We were not very good at it because 40-man Molten Core was a challenge of, okay, whose turn is it to loot the frickin' dog? Like, please, someone loot the dog so we can skin this thing for the corehound leather. Like, I'm begging you. Loot the goddamn dog. But, yeah, no, it was after that point when, right about when Burning Crusade came out that I was like, I want to try, like, seriously raiding. Like, I want to see the upper level stuff. Cause I hadn't seen Blackwing Lair. Like, I hadn't seen Nostradamus. Sorry, not Nostradamus. That's a prophet. Naxxramas. That's the actual dungeon. I hadn't seen Naxxramas, so it was like I'd seen, the announcements and people talking about their Naxxramas gear, and I was like, I really want to do that. Like, I want to be at the upper echelon of that, and concerted push to actually get to this upper tier of raiding.
So you got there eventually, but in my research, I found that you mentioned that you're pushing for that upper tier of rating, and just so again, when people sit at home going like, "Well, this guy says he raided, but what does that mean? That could mean anything. My grandma raided." But It seems that you actually did take it to quite lofty heights because on your rogue, I think you were on the server Kill Jaden, is that correct? And you're in a guild called the Flying Hellfish that actually went pretty far.
Yeah, we were pretty good. I think we were top 3 in the US at one point. And yeah, we were competing pretty heavily for raid progress, and it was legit like, you better know your DPS rotations. Like, you better be farming your mats. You better have your gear squared away, because if not, you're not going to be joining the raids on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Mm-hmm. I want to make sure I'm remembering this correctly, because I'm pretty sure in my head that server reset was Tuesdays, right?
I can't remember for the life of me, but I remember sort of seeing the countdown going like, no.
Yeah, well, so let's go with that. Server resets were Tuesdays.
Okay.
So basically, like, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, like, you had to be ready to go, because if you weren't, then the other people who were ready to go in the guild, they would take your spot. And so I have a very competitive mindset, and for me, it was, I want to be at that upper level. Like, I don't want to just be watching raid chat. Like, I don't want to be listening in on TeamSpeak. Like, I want to be a part of that. Like, I want to be pushing content. And so in order to get there, like, I had to bust my ass. I mean, high level raiding, you got to commit to that.
Absolutely. And I'm being told by a listener now that yes, it very much so was Tuesday. So you're right. But
good. I remembered it right. Hooray.
If I could just touch on, you mentioned, the fact that, you wanted to get into this guild and you found your way in this guild that was actually, quite high up the rankings. And, in doing my research as a diligent interviewer, I watched, a couple of interviews with you. I read many an article on you, and I found obviously a old interview that many people have seen that you did with Conan a few years ago. And, you mentioned the following where you said, the only time I've dropped the, hey, I'm an NFL player line was to get into your raiding guild. So my question to you is, can you tell us the process with you sort of not only finding this guild and wanting to get involved with them, but the dance that you may have done with the GM or other members in wanting to get in before realizing you had to drop the hammer with the NFL line?
Yeah, so on the Kill Jaden server, it was Flying Hellfish on the Horde side, and I think it was often on the Alliance side. Basically, like, those were the top two guilds. Like, if you wanted to progress, you had to be in one of those guilds. So, obviously, as a Horde side player, I needed to be in Flying Hellfish. And I had been paying attention to their forums because prior to that, the guilds I were in, it was from, my friend from high school and then friends that he knew. And it was kind of like it's like an alliance between a couple guilds, but it was basically okay, you have 10 people show up who actually really want to do this, and then the other 30 people are like, hooray! It's raid content. Let's not loot the fucking dog. So, like, I had been looking, and I let them know, like, hey guys, I want to move on. Like, I want to see this content. And so Flying Hellfish was kind of the next step that I was looking at. And so I'd been browsing their forums, and I saw that they were recruiting for a couple DPS classes. And so I go to their forums, and I'm like, here's my submission. I know my rotations. I know what to do as a rogue. Oh, and by the way, I'm in the NFL. And that was the only time in my life that I have dropped hey, I'm in the NFL card.
And what was the reaction?
I really wanted to see the content.
What was the reaction?
It was great because like the main reaction was, oh, you're an NFL player, whatever. Can you deal with the trolling bullshit that we're going to throw at you? I'm like, I grew up with the internet. Like, I'm not a football player who's playing WoW. I'm a nerd who also happens to play football.
Right. Right.
Like, and I think the vast majority of the guild got that, and that was probably one of the main reasons why I got accepted to the guild, because they understood that, like, I wanted to see this content because I was a fucking nerd. like being in the NFL was just kind of the secondary thing where it's like, oh, hey, here's the injury point, but you also know your DPS rotations and you're a giant geek.
Well, I've seen you throw that quote a bit around online, and it's something I'd love to dive into just a little bit further, because you have said that, yeah, obviously tongue in cheek, that the, or not so tongue in cheek, that the NFL career was very much so there to fund your other hobbies, being sort of more nerdy hobbies. And it's not just World of Warcraft that you're into, sort of very, very lightly. You're also into things like, tabletop gaming, Magic the Gathering, stuff like that. You released your own tabletop game. Is that right?
Yeah, so I don't know if your Discord chat viewers can see this, but my icon right now is of the card game that I designed and released called Twilight of the Gods. So I've been playing Magic the Gathering since I was, probably like 11, 12 years old. And I love Magic. Like, it's a fantastic game, but I also have issues with Magic. And most of my issues boil down to the fact that one person gets to play the game while the other person has to sit and watch them play the game. So in my head, I thought to myself, how can I fix this? How can I make it so that both players are playing the game, and that whoever wins, it's not determined by RNGesus, it's determined by who played better than the other person. And that was the game that I wanted to make. And hopefully that's the game that I did make, because we've received very, very positive feedback on that. But yeah, no, like I feel like a lot of people think of me as the football player who happens to have nerdy interests. And I would love to assure you that it's the complete opposite. I was a nerd first and foremost. Like, I grew up reading science fiction fantasy. My football coach had to tell me, stop reading books on the sideline because you have to pay attention to the game. Like, that was in high school. And I was like, all right, I'll stop reading books on the sideline, but you can't keep me from reading books on the way to and from the game because we're on the bus.
So you're reading the books on the sideline, then you're jumping into the game and kicking the game-winning field goal.
Right, exactly. Like that, because I've always felt like if I'm doing the job properly, like if I can go out and perform the way you want me to perform, what do you care about what I'm doing in my free time? Yeah. And like that's one of the things that's always kind of perplexed me, is this idea that the jock geek dichotomy has to exist. It's like, no, it doesn't have to exist. You can do both things. You can do anything you want. We're human beings. Like, we're multifaceted in what we want to do, what we choose to achieve in. And I like sports. I also like nerd stuff. Like, I like nerd stuff more than sports. I just happen to be very, very good at sports. What does it matter if I'm good at both?
No, I totally hear you. And you're preaching to the choir here, because I share the same interests. And it's not like, we're the only ones. There's plenty of people out there that are very passionate about sports and very passionate about sort of, nerdy hobbies, if you will. But, I spend equal amounts of time talking shit with my jock mates about sports as I do jumping online on a Discord or on WoW and talking with, people who might not share the same passion for sports about, obviously, things like rogues and DPS and raids and stuff like that. So I appreciate where you're coming from there. We'll go down this rabbit hole a little bit now that it's come up organically. But in terms of, you talked about, the book on the sci-fi book on the sideline, and you wound up writing a sci-fi book, didn't you?
I did. I actually wrote I've actually written 2 sci-fi books with a friend of mine, Andy Reiner. He's the executive editor of Game Informer, and he lives in Minnesota. So we actually met each other because obviously I was playing for the Vikings, and he lived in Minnesota, and it turned out we lived like 10 minutes away from each other. So we met each other at it was kind of like a board game get together of a mutual friend. His name's Paul Charchian. He does a show. It's called Video Games Weekly, where it's on the local sports station, but it's all about video games and board games. So it's a fantastic show. And one thing I think a lot of your listeners might not realize is that, like, Minnesota is kind of this hub for board games and card games and tabletop games, because in the winter, there's nothing else you can do. Like, it's just snow and ice, and you're inside trying to figure out what you can do. So there's a lot of board games, card games, stuff like that. But anyways, me and Andy met, and one day we were talking over ideas for like a book, and we were brainstorming back and forth, and we're like, we should write a science fiction book together. And so we ended up writing one, self-published it, wrote the sequel to that. The first one's called Prime, a Genesis series event. Quick note to your listeners: if you're going to self-publish a book on Amazon, don't call it Prime. It's people will have trouble finding your book.
I can imagine. Excellent. Well, it's obviously you're quite invested in this stuff, and I'm going down these paths in order to sort of beef up your geek cred a little bit, so that people do realize that it's quite legit. Absolutely. But where I want to go with this is, as you evolve from, the high school sports star into the college, you're doing very well at college as well. I promised a listener that, I'd give UCLA a shout out. Listener Tian, listener Tian SG wanted me to throw in a Go Bruins. Even though I've got familial ties to USC, I'll still get that in there. That's all right.
Oh, I don't know if we can continue this interview.
But funny story. I actually played rugby for Clemson, so that's where my allegiances lie. But no, in terms of you then go on to obviously play in the NFL, but this whole time you've got these hobbies in the background and you're surrounded by, relatively burly macho men who might not share your interests. How did you deal with, whether it's in the locker room or in the hotel on road, when you're traveling around road games and things like that, sort of, balancing your hobbies with your sporting life?
So that's something where, apologies to any of your listeners who have troubles with, bad language, but my level of fucks given is 0.
Excellent.
My entire life, it has been, I want to do these things, so I'm going to do them. Like, for example, my senior year in high school, I was it was this new All-Star game. It was like the California-Texas All-Star game. It was the first year they were doing it.
Yep. And
my roommate who I actually ended up playing with at UCLA. He was an offensive lineman named Yosef Isiev. So we're together in this hotel room. And I mean, Yosef is just full on meathead football offensive lineman. And I show up in the hotel room with my PS1 with Legend of the Dragoon.
Oh, yeah.
Because I want to beat this fucking RPG because it's a really good RPG.
Yeah, definitely. So you're hooking that up to the hotel TV and he's like, what the fuck are you doing?
I'm not just hooking it up to the hotel TV. I'm finding a pair of pliers so I can pull off the guarding cable that they have to the input.
And he's sitting there sort of rubbing his hands together going, sweet, you're unlocking the porn channel.
Right. Yeah, it's like, nope, not at all. But yeah, no, like that was me growing up, is that I didn't care what other people thought about what I was doing because I wanted to do it and I wanted to be good at what I was doing. And so I tried to carry that on into college, into the NFL. And, it was one of those things that I definitely did carry on because when I was in the NFL, this was probably my 4th or 5th year. Have you played, Warhammer at all? Warhammer 40K?
No, I haven't.
Okay, but do you know what they are? Like tabletop miniature?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you all of my experience with it. I actually took my girlfriend to a place in Sydney the other day where people gather and do the tabletop with the Warhammer stuff, and I'd always known about this place. I'd never gone in. I was like, babe, let's just go in. I want to see what happens in here. And we just stayed for about 10 minutes just watching everyone. Everyone's having a blast, and I was like, fuck this. They're having such a great time. It's not something that I'm personally into, but I'm like, I respected it. I was like, this looks really cool.
Yeah, no, and so that was the thing. Like I was really into Warhammer and Warhammer 40K, and at that point in my life, like I had kind of moved on from Warhammer to War Machine, which was a similar tabletop strategy wargaming system, but it was slightly less RNG based. It was more based around movement and tactical ability versus how many 4, 5s, and 6s can you roll with your Space Marines? Mm-hmm. And so in the locker room, I would be painting my miniatures. So,
in the locker room itself, you'd do it.
Yeah, in the locker room itself.
That's great.
Because like as a special teams member, you wake up, you go to the facility probably around 7:30, 7:45. You get breakfast. You have a special teams meeting at 8:15, team meeting at like 9. You're done with team meeting at like 9:15. You do your position meeting from 9:15 to about 9:30. And then you don't have anything to do until about 11 or so, which is when walkthrough happens. And pretty much you just have to be there at walkthrough. So that's about an hour and 45 minutes where there's really nothing to do.
Yeah.
And sometimes me and my long snapper would play dominoes with each other, or, we'd browse the internet or just, find ways to pass the time. But one of the ways I would pass the time is I would paint my War Machine miniatures.
Yeah.
And you'd get guys from the other position groups because they were watching film at that time. They would come into the locker room in their 4 or 5 minute breaks, and they'd be like, "What are you doing?" I'd be like, "Oh, I'm painting Lich Lord Venethrax. He has this ability. He enables his troops to do this. His feat is this."
What were the looks you got?
Oh God, it'd just be like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" But at the same time, I would tell them, like, this is something I geek out about. You guys are constantly talking about hunting or fishing or whatever it is that you geek out about. Like, all of us, we all geek out about something. It doesn't matter what it is. It's okay to geek out about something. Like,
100%.
it's not a big deal.
100%. And it's something that, I enjoy the conjuring of the image with the guys coming up to you and inquiring what you're doing, and they get the line, "I'm playing with my miniatures" in the locker room. Outside of that, any kind of particular moments or memories with strange things that have happened sort of on the road, in the locker room, or sharing hotel rooms, or at college, or anything where your hobby has come up somehow in conversation?
So this isn't quite like video games hobby, but definitely hobby oriented in that. Oops, sorry, that was my phone.
That's all right.
Let me turn that on silent. We were playing in, God, what was it? It must have been probably 2010. We were playing an away game, at St. Louis against the Rams. And at that time I was in a band, and, we were doing shows in the Minneapolis area. And so we did a show Friday night. I was playing bass guitar. I did not get home until 4:30 in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning. And so, I had to be at the facility at 7:30. We fly out to St. Louis at 11:30. The game the next day on Sunday is at 12. And we get to the game, and I'm just like, I am not all here. I have not had enough sleep. I really hope this doesn't backfire on me. And luckily it didn't. I actually had a pretty good game.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was definitely one of the things where, when I was raiding heavily in WoW, I had an agreement with my guild where, I would raid Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, but once it came to Friday and Saturday, I could not stay up. I needed to focus on playing football because that's what paid the bills.
Well, that was definitely a question I had lined up for you. And maybe I'm not sure if there's one instance, but was there ever a moment, you say you were sort of pretty diligent with the Friday and Saturday routine, staying away from staying up late, but was there ever a moment where your sort of love of World of Warcraft did somewhat affect your profession?
I would say the only time would be during training camp, because during training camp, we were in these terrible dorm rooms at, so Mankato is a city in southern Minnesota that it's just bad. We had, the dorms we were staying at, I will never forget this. The dorms we were staying at, we had a rookie, show up, and as we were moving into the dorms for training camp, so training camp is you're spending about 3 weeks in these dorms, for preseason. He shows up and he says, "Man, I've seen prison cells worse than this." It's just holy crap, we're not in a good place right now. So yeah, the dorms in Mankato were not great. I actually had my World of Warcraft account hacked while I was in the dorms at Mankato because I don't think their Wi-Fi was secured.
Right.
Luckily, I managed to get my stuff back. But yeah, no, it was, I would say preseason was probably the only time that I was affected by playing World of Warcraft, because I knew that as long as I performed decently, I was going to be on the team. And it was kind of when Blizzard was releasing new content at the time. So I was like, I want to help my guild out. Like, I want to be at the forefront of conquering this new content.
Right.
And it was just something that it was more important to stay up until 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning and do this, because I knew that I could go out the next day and perform at a high enough level to where I wouldn't lose my job.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay. Now, if we could just go back, I want to come back to the sports angle a little bit later on, but I'll just take you back to some things you said, and we'll go deep now into World of Warcraft stuff. So let's pull our socks up here. Here we go. Now, you mentioned that's right. You mentioned that story about getting into the guild. If I can ask just about life prior to being in the Flying Hellfish, when you obviously level up to 60, you do your thing. What was it like being anonymous in Azeroth, knowing that you were interacting with people all the time who may have loved to have known who you were?
A lot of Terran Mill versus
South Shore, yeah.
Yeah. Just completely meaningless PvP battles where nothing mattered. It was a lot of trying to achieve that high level content, but kind of subconsciously knowing if I wasn't in that upper echelon rating guild, I wouldn't be able to see that content. Because like you could tell when you went into, Alterac Valley or Terran Mill, or once they introduced arena mode, like you could tell the players who were in the rating level content because they would just wipe the floor with you. I mean, the gear they had was just ridiculous compared to what was available to you as a semi-casual, somewhat hardcore player.
Right.
And I mean, this was before Blizzard introduced like actual PvP gear. I mean, it was like if you were raiding Blackwing Lair, if you were raiding Naxxramas, you were wiping the floor with everyone else.
Yeah.
There was no question. And so for me, it was kind of, okay, how do I compete with this? How do I make my way through this game world? But also kind of like, how do I get to that level? Right? Like what do I need to do in order to achieve that level of success? And I've always been a very competitive person. I mean, it's mainly manifested in sports, but like at my core, I want to be the best. And so when I'm playing a game like WoW, and it's a game that like it really sucked me in deep, I want to be the best. So how do I become the best? Like, what do I need to do to get there? And that's, I think, what eventually led me to joining the Flying Hellfish, because that was my avenue to becoming the best, because they were the best guild on my server.
So did you ever have a moment at all interacting with anyone, whether it's sort of pre or post joining the Flying Hellfish, where, it might be like you say, a PvP moment in a Terran Mill versus South Shore, or just rolling around solo in World PvP or anything like that, where someone's sort of giving you a bit of shit, someone from your own faction, if you've had a bit of an argument or a bit of a disagreement, maybe a sale went wrong or something like that, and you get the line like, yeah, whatever, man, you're just some fucking kid sitting in your mama's basement, and you want to go like, hey, man, I'm a fucking NFL player, shut up.
I don't think I ever had a moment like that. For me, I think the moment that really spurred me on was, it was before Burning Crusade. It was when they introduced the arena. It was probably either season 1 or season 2. Back when Rogue Mage Priest was kind of like the group for 3v3s.
Yep.
So I was with a couple buddies from, the guild I was currently in at the time. And like we did pretty good. We never made Gladiator. I think we made Duelist one season. I want to say it was season 2. Like we were high 1900s, maybe pushing close to 2000s in terms of our rating. But we would run into a group from the Flying Hellfish when we were pushing towards the 2000s, and they would just smash us. Like it was not even close.
Yeah.
I mean, they were running, God, it was like warrior, druid. I don't even remember what the third class was, but like their warrior, it was Golga something. I don't remember his name, but like it would just, as a rogue at that time, trying to go up against a warrior who knew what they were doing and was equipped in raid gear, like you were fucked.
Yeah.
So there was nothing you could do.
So this was in the Burning Crusade around that time. Obviously, you sound like you were PvPing a little bit.
Yeah, it was kind of like in the early moments of Burning Crusade, late moments of Vanilla, like, cause I think I joined Hellfish kind of maybe about a third of the way through Burning Crusade.
Yep.
But yeah, it was definitely like you could tell, man, these guys are on a different level than we are.
Yep.
Like this is not cool.
I'll come back to Vanilla in a second, but now that you've sort of talked about a few Burning Crusade memories, and you mentioned earlier, you talked about sort of being, the third rank with the Flying Hellfish, and I think that was what you got the US third kill on Illidan, is that right?
Yeah, I believe so.
So tell us about that moment when you obviously you said you set your minds to hardcore raiding. You've gotten through with the guys and the girls. You've gone through everything. You get up to the Black Temple and finally you take down Illidan. How was that moment for you personally?
So the main thing I remember was, does everyone have their fucking consumables?
Like, the joy of farming.
Yeah, no, it was terrible. Like you had to farm Life Bloom, you had to have your herbalism up to a certain level, or you had to farm the mats in order to give them to the person who could create the flasks that you needed. And it was just like, do I really want to do this? But at the end of the day, yeah, I really did want to do this. So farmed the mats, made sure that I had my consumables, and then it was, okay, what are my rotations? What's the gear that I need to have? Like, how can I perform at peak efficiency? And what was the DPS meter, during those times? God, I don't even remember.
Someone will yell it out in chat. I can't remember.
Yeah, no, I'm sure they will. It was like a bar graph almost, where you could see almost in real time, kind of like who was at top at DPS. And so it was this just constant battle between the rogues and I think at the time, I think it was the mages. Like, I think it was rogues and mages battling for top DPS. Like, who was topping the meter? Because you knew, okay, if I'm topping the meter and not dying, if you're going to be DPS, like, you do 0 DPS when you're dead. So make sure you stay alive.
Definitely. It's a key component of being a DPS player generally it's preferable to be alive, yes.
Right, like, cause if you die going for that extra 5, you could have done an additional 10%. One of those is bigger than the other.
Exactly. But I'm getting told by the listeners that obviously there were several DPS add-ons available, but it might have been Recount that you're thinking of, which was a popular one at the time as well.
Yeah, Recount was probably it.
Okay, no worries. Now, you talked about sort of, the life of a DPS player and the life of a rogue, and you talked about how you felt a bit of pressure to obviously be on the top of your game in the raids. What was it like, in terms of people pushing for your spots? Did you feel the heat behind you from people wanting that position in the raid in your guild?
So for me, it felt more like I was the person behind, as the 2 rogues ahead of me, Raldez and Nurak, they had been with the guild since Naxxramas, like vanilla Naxxramas. And I was the newcomer. So in order for me to break in, like, I had to demonstrate I wasn't just the NFL player who also happened to play WoW. It was, I legit knew what I was doing. So that was one of the biggest hurdles for me to overcome, was proving that I actually belonged in the raid group as a contributing DPS member. And, you know, I'm not gonna lie, like, it was tough, especially during Burning Crusade, where, both Raldez and Nurak, like, when we took down Illidan, you know, when we got the Illidan blades, like, they were the ones who got them first, because they were the established members of the guild. And I was like, well, shit, like, I understand how these can be used. I understand how, if I build up my accuracy and I go full combat spec, like, I can smash the DPS charts. But at the same time, I was familiar with that from football, where you got to pay your dues, right? Yep. Like, if you're the freshman coming in on a college team and there's a junior, a senior, someone who's already been through the program, like, they're going to be the starter. You can't just expect to supplant them. And so I feel like that was something that I was in a unique position to understand, where it might have led to guild drama, but because I knew, okay, yeah, I know these guys have put in the time. Like, I know they're going to be there at every raid. I know that they're going to use the Illidan blades to help the guild out. Like, it's not like, eventually it will be my turn.
Yeah. And I think sorry, I was just going to say, it was probably the right thing to do, because you talked about drama. People probably would have hit the roof if it had gone to you.
Right, exactly. Like, it's, oh, you've got this new guy coming in, all of a sudden he's getting lanes. Yeah. Like,
give it to the celebrity in the group.
Right. Like, and that's one of the big things that kills guilds is drama. Yeah. Like, it's the guild leader is favoring this one person over, you know, the people who have been there the entire time. And then you get whisper campaigns and rumors and all this shit, and the guild just breaks up. And it's like, well, we were doing so well. Yeah. we were pushing content. And so I feel like that's partially on the guild leaders to understand, but it's also on the members of the guild to understand that if you're a newcomer to the guild, like, you got to recognize that, okay, these other people have been there. Like, they've put in the time. They've earned their dragon kill points. Yeah. Like, they get the Illidan blade, and hopefully you guys get it on farm to where eventually all the rogues get Illidan blades. But if you don't, well, sometimes that's the way the cookie crumbles.
Well, speaking of, you know, the Warglaives of Azzinoth, you sounded like you got your pair in the end. Is that right?
I didn't. I got the offhand. I never did get the main hand.
I see. Well, it's still quite the achievement, definitely.
Yeah. I did get a Thunderfury though.
Oh, you did?
I did. That only took me 2 years to get.
Did you get that after Burning Crusade came out?
I did. It was, I want to say it was in Wrath of the Lich King. Okay. When you could actually, like, 4-man Molten Core up to Nar. Right. It was, no, sorry, not Nar, Gar. I'm thinking.
Right.
But, yeah, no, it was, I had a buddy of mine, Edgewalker. He played a paladin. And so, like, he would just tank everything, and then I would kill stuff, and then we'd bring, like, 2 other people to help kill stuff faster. And we must have done, like, probably 45, 46 Gar runs until I finally got my binding.
Excellent.
And it was like, the day I got that binding, I was like, oh, this is the best feeling of my life, because fuck you, RNG. That's awful. I'd already farmed all the Elementium. I'd farmed everything else. I just needed this goddamn binding to drop.
Oh, wow. Did somebody say Thunderfury, Blessed Blade of the Windseeker? Excellent.
Oh, no, I linked it in general chat as soon as I got it.
Fantastic. Hey, so flowing on from that, any other memorable hunts for items or anything that drove you mad in the game, trying to get in your inventory?
No, I think Thunderfury was the main one. Like that was kind of like the item to get because it had that aura around it where like by the time I got it, like it wasn't even that good.
Yeah. But it was more just, it was as a collector's item.
Right, exactly. It was I have the status symbol, I spent the time, I did this shit.
Yeah.
And like I remember I would be in my dorm room in college going to, what was the material? Was it thorium? I think that was the material.
I think so.
Yeah, so like I would be competing with the Chinese gold farmers for the thorium respawn points in Eastern Plaguelands. Like, I had that shit down.
Yeah.
When I was running from point to point to point. And you would see the same people.
Yeah, definitely.
Trying to get there to mine before you could. But I was like, nope, I'm getting my Elementium.
It's funny, you say that you got Thunderfury when it was a little bit out of vogue, if you will. And the image that comes up in my mind is kind of like, I don't know, the 45-year-old guy that now would buy like the 95 Porsche and be like, see, huh?
Yes.
Huh?
Yeah, exactly.
I made it.
So I have to say, it's my wife probably, I don't know if she consciously appreciates, but hopefully subconsciously she appreciates that my midlife crisis was getting Thunderfury as opposed to the Stingray Corvette in the driveway.
Well, if I can touch on that a little bit, if you're happy to talk about sort of very, very lightly just the personal life and dealing with World of Warcraft you mentioned you've got a wife, you've got some kids, and the kids might not have been on the scene when you first started playing, but when you were sort of again, balancing work, balancing a personal life, did the wife give you all the time in the world to play the game and pursue your endeavors there?
No, it was definitely something where, like, she understood that this was something that I was into, but there were also nights where, like, I'd come to bed at, 2, 3 in the morning because I was on Midwest time and my guild was on West Coast time. Mm-hmm. So for them, a 8 to 12 raiding schedule was 10 to 2 in the morning raiding schedule for me.
Right.
And my wife would be like, hey, you came to bed at 2:30 in the morning last night. Like, what's up with that? I was like, I was raiding with my guild.
See, I thought you'd do the opposite. That's where the lie becomes like you spray the women's perfume on you and you're like, oh, I was out doing something. I was out fooling around or something. She's like, no, you were raiding again, weren't you?
I was at the strip club with the guys. Yeah. It's cool. It's Destiny. She's a stripper. Like, it's fine.
Oh, gee.
Yeah, no, that was definitely something where I made a conscious decision that once my first daughter was born, that I essentially gave up MMOs because I knew, okay, at this time I need games that I can pause, and you can't pause an MMO. And for me, it's more important that I'm there for my kids than I'm there for my guild.
Yes.
And I feel like hopefully everyone listening, everyone paying attention on the Discord chat, please adopt this because real life is more important than ones and zeros. Like it really is. I mean, I know you develop relationships with your guildmates. I know that they're real people, and I know that you can have a conversation with someone. You can have a relationship with someone that you will never meet in person, but they're just as much a part of your life as any of the people that you come in contact on a regular basis. But your kids are more important than that. Like you have to take care of your kids.
Absolutely. And well, with your children, sort of, I think, am I right? They're about 10 and 8 years old, something like that?
Yeah, they're 10 and 8.
Okay, so with the kids growing up now, have they shown any kind of interest whatsoever towards the kind of stuff that you do in your spare time?
Oh, yeah, they do.
So is that something that you'd encourage, obviously? Or not quite?
So that's a tough question because I grew up kind of as the internet was growing up, and right now my older daughter is bugging me to allow her to install Fortnite on either the PS4 or the PC. And I'm like, am I ready to have the conversation about people you meet online may not be who you think they are?
Right. Yes.
And so, and the reason why I bring that up is because she has a couple other games that she plays, generally like children's type games. One of them is called Club Penguin. Mm-hmm. And the other day she told me, hey, I found a new friend. They told me how to get this free pet. And so I did some research online. It was essentially a pet that you could get if you had signed up for the game 2 years ago, but then they made available to everyone if you typed in a specific code word. But I'm like, hey, is this friend of yours someone from school? And she's like, no, they're just someone who sent a buddy request. I'm like, fuck the internet.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like, and as someone who grew up with the internet, you understand how fucked up that can get.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do I explain that to a 10-year-old? I mean, like, how do I get her to understand that someone who can be your friend right up to the moment where they ask for your parents' credit card is not your friend?
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, that's the current struggle I'm going through, and hopefully I'll find a way through. Like I feel confident just because I have grown up in that era, and I do kind of understand like what that environment is like, but still, like as a parent, it's freaking terrifying.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, it's one of those things that you talk about sort of gaming in the environment that we live in today and dealing with people on the internet. And if I can just take you back to a comment that you made earlier with sort of maybe the gentle ribbing that some people on the internet may have given you, namely your guildmates, once they found out who you were and that you were becoming a member of the guild. What was some of the lines or the barbs or the fun trash talk that would come your way once people knew who you were within the guild?
Well, I think the main one was, oh, you're a football player. Like, what do you know about playing WoW?
Right.
And so it was like, well, yeah, I'm a football player, but first and foremost, I was a nerd. Like I'm out there researching DPS rotations. Like I'm looking online for, okay, I need to do slice and dice into rupture, into eviscerate, into slice and dice, into rupture, into eviscerate. like I get that this isn't just I'm gonna hit random buttons and win the game. It's like, this is a job. Like, this is math. Yeah. And so I think once I demonstrated that, the kind of ribbing was, it turned into more like, oh, we're playing you guys this weekend. You better have a bad game.
Right. Can you shank a punt for gambling purposes?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like, we had one guy, he was a San Francisco 49ers fan. And so, like, when we played the 49ers, he was like, can you just have a bad game? And I was like, no, I'm not going to have a bad game. This is my livelihood. We'll go ahead and raid tomorrow, but no, I'm not going to have a bad game.
Well, I'll just take you back to another quote that you mentioned in that Conan interview that I brought up earlier. And it's again sort of going down that path that, you obviously do such a great job of deconstructing stereotypes about football players. And you said in that interview, a lot of people have this assumption of NFL players as kind of knuckle-dragging troglodytes because you really only hear about the bad players. Those are the guys who make the news. And there's a lot of very smart NFL players in the locker room. I've had a lot of great conversations, but you don't hear about them because they take care of business and they go home. So just on the kind of some of the conversations that you might have had within your during your time in the league, did you ever bump into anyone that shared any of the same hobbies as you?
I did, actually. So I think the most extreme example was a guy I met during the preseason of, God, it must have been like 2007, 2008. He played Final Fantasy 11, the online version of Final Fantasy. And he was legit like level 60 in Final Fantasy 11. I was like, holy crap. You're on another level, man.
Yeah.
That's more grinding than I want to do.
Do you remember who that was? Was that someone just trying to make a roster or?
Yeah, no, he was a guy trying to make a roster. He didn't end up making the active squad or practice squad. He was just another guy. But I remember talking with him and I was like, holy shit. You're legit. You're into this. And one of the things I noticed as I spent more time in the league, so I got into the NFL in 2005, and it was around probably 2008, 2009 that the rookies that were coming into the league, they were guys who had grown up with a PC or an Xbox or a PlayStation in their house.
Yep. So
they were familiar with video games. Right? And they'd gone to college and they played video games. This wasn't something out of the ordinary. It was just, this is what you did. And so, I think it was 2009. One of our offensive linemen, Matt Khalil. He was I want to say he was a first round pick.
And a Trojan. I think.
Yeah. No, he came in and in the locker room, he was a World of Warcraft player. Oh. Yeah, no, he legit, he really liked playing World of Warcraft. I was like, holy crap, this is the future.
Yep.
This is, these are guys who have grown up knowing video games. They have known what it's like to be on the internet, and to them, it's normal. It's not something out of the ordinary. It's not something that only nerds do. This is just what you do for fun.
Absolutely.
And that was awesome to see.
Did you talk about the game with Matt at all?
Oh, I did. Yeah. No, I did. He definitely wasn't, a raider.
Right.
he was more he enjoyed playing the game, and, he was trying to push his character, but I feel in order to be top tier rating in Warcraft plus playing in the NFL, you kind of need the free time of a specialist, not so much an offensive lineman.
Right.
Because we don't have a lot of plays to learn.
Right.
It's, punt left, punt right, punt it down the middle.
It's one of those things where I was secretly hoping if you had some random story up your sleeve, you know what? Antonio Cromartie was a level 60 mage and a hell of a player.
Although, so I do have another story.
Okay.
So Curt Schilling.
Yep.
He sent me a message. God, what would this have been? Probably 2009, 2010. This was back when he was developing his Kingdom of
Amalur. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then trying to move that into his MMO project.
Yep.
And so he was looking for investors. And I was like, all right, well, I know you're big into EverQuest. I know you're a big MMO player. why don't you send me over your prospectus and I'll take a look at it and then I'll let you know. And so he sent over kind of like what they figured their financial details would be. And they were,
Yes.
they were comparing their initial earning profits to World of Warcraft. I was like,
wow.
Whoa, wait a minute.
Maybe that was the first misstep for old Curt.
Yeah, like this, you're not like World of Warcraft. That was a singular event. Like this, you're not going to achieve that. So I called him back. I'm like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to invest. And then lo and behold,
what happened later,
yeah. Yeah. And I was just like, come on, man.
I must admit, I was always quite intrigued by that whole situation. It's, gone on for so many years now. And I think just recently the IP was recently bought by, I want to say like THQ Nordic or something, but it'd be interesting to see if anything comes up with the old Kingdoms of Amalur IP further down the track.
Yeah, no, well, so that's the thing. Like, I bought the single player game. It was actually a pretty good.
It was a great game. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed playing it, and it was something where I feel like they bit off more than they could chew. In that at that time frame, a lot of people were looking at MMOs as we can be the next WoW, and it's like, no, you're not going to be the next WoW. Like if you're lucky, you'll be the next EverQuest.
Yeah.
Like that's if you're lucky. And so many people didn't understand that, to where like WoW's success was this combination of, okay, MMOs have reached the state where enough people understand that they exist. They understand that Blizzard is a really good development house. They're a really good publisher, and it's easy enough to where you can buy in and play the game. It's not the frustration of trying to figure out, okay, how does my Ultima, how does my EverQuest character work? Like, how do I find quests, right? Like, how does my Dark Age of Camelot character craft things? Like, WoW simplified a lot of things, and they drew in that initial audience, and once that audience has connected with that game, you better have something really special to pull them away from that. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen.
Definitely. And when we talk about that kind of lightning in a bottle moment that happened when we got WoW and the way in which it blew up. But, as you know, the subject of this podcast is based around World of Warcraft Classic and the fact that we're going back soon and we're doing it all again. Blizzard has decided to somewhat resurrect vanilla and introduce classic servers for everyone. Tell me, do you recall, what was your knowledge of the project? Do you remember sort of hearing the news and whether you had any thoughts about it, and also whether you considered jumping back in when Classic comes out at all?
So let me address the last part first. Probably not going to get back into an MMO because I have kids.
Yep.
I find that children make it very hard to do games that you can't pause.
Yep. And then you'd have to be a filthy casual like me.
Yeah, exactly. And then I'm one of those people who put it like the top level.
Yeah.
So yeah, probably not gonna happen. But no, I think it's hard to explain to people that I think it will be interesting, but at the same time, I don't think it's going to be everything that people want it to be, because vanilla WoW, while it was a paradigm shift at the time, when you compare it to what's available now,
yep,
like it's not all that.
Yep.
Right? Like
you're saying it's shifted again and people should obviously just move with the times.
Yeah, like I feel there's this idea that we look at the past through these, kind of rose-colored glasses, that, oh, vanilla WoW, this was amazing, this, and it was so cool, but at the same time, you didn't know that all these other things were possible. And so, like, I worry that a lot of people that have gotten their hopes hyped up for vanilla WoW are going to go back to it and be like, wait a minute, I have to go from 1,000 needles all the way
Yeah.
to wherever the fuck it is that I have to go. Holy crap, this is terrible. Where's my flying mouse?
Sorry, go on.
And it's like, there's a reason they introduced those things. It's because it made the game more accessible. It made the parts that weren't fun more fun. And I think there is something to be said for that nostalgia factor, but at the same time, like, you have to recognize that was a point in your life when you didn't know what else was out there.
Yep.
So approach it as, okay, I'm going to revisit this point in my life, but I'm not going to ever be able to recreate it.
Oh, if I can, Chris, you obviously you seem like such a good sport and a fun guy. So if you'll allow me to slightly push back a little bit here, because everything you've said is 100% spot on, and it's an argument that comes up so often, and it's not without its merits. You know, we talk about quality of life measures that have been introduced by Blizzard over the years in order to make things easy and accessible. Exactly like you say, it's such a great term to use. I think the pushback and to play devil's advocate, the counter argument to that from the community at large is generally that, you know, some of us might be still playing the game through clandestine means and, you know, jumping on private servers and doing nefarious things. So there
Say
are
no more.
Oh, I mean, I'm happy to talk about it. I joke on the show that I don't treat private servers like they're Voldemort. I'm more than happy to say their name. It's fine. But, you know, people still do play the game in ways, you know, it's like Jurassic Park, life finds a way. But, they're sitting there playing the game still in 2018 and they are still enjoying it and putting in the time sink that they used to back in the day. And so it's sort of one of those things where it's like, well, it might be more than nostalgia that drives us forward because we are still playing and enjoying the game. Whereas what I might put to you know what I do for a living. If I could pretend for a second that I've got you in the witness box and I'm sort of, you know, peppering you with questions. If I would say, like, out of interest, do you happen to play retro games at all? Do you revisit any of your old favorites?
Oh yeah, no, like, one of my favorite games, Final Fantasy 3 in the US, 6 in Japanese.
Absolutely great game.
Yeah, no, like, in my humble opinion, one of the best games ever made.
I completely agree.
Yeah, no, and it's one of those things where, like, a great game will transcend the test of time.
And there's the rub.
But the thing is, though, is that our appreciation of a great game is so subjective that where, for me, going back to classic WoW may not be the thing that will do it for me. For someone else, like, that's exactly what they wanted, and that's not a bad thing. Like, we should all be allowed to enjoy the things that we want to enjoy. And so, like, that's one of the things where I'm actually, like, really glad that Blizzard is bringing back classic WoW, because there are people out there who they want that vanilla experience. Like, they want to relive what they experienced back in, was it like 2003, 2004?
I mean, 04, 05, 06, yeah.
Yeah, like, that's fine. Like, we don't all have to be the same person. We don't all have to enjoy the same thing. It's okay for people to enjoy things that you may not necessarily enjoy. And speaking to a broader societal point, like, I feel like that's one of the huge problems with our current state of affairs, is that so many people think that, oh, if I'm not enjoying this thing, that means no one should enjoy this thing. But that's not the case. Yep. Like, it doesn't matter if you don't enjoy this thing. If other people enjoy this thing, let them enjoy it. That's okay.
Fantastic points. And quite honestly, I couldn't have put it better, but that's one of the things that has come up. It's been an unfortunate thing to a certain degree that there has been a bit of antagonism between, if you call it, you know, the modern WoW player base and now the classic player base, the fans of the older game. And it's, you know, I don't want to say it's quite a Jets and Sharks situation from West Side Story or anything, but like, there's been a few barbs thrown back and forth. And as you say, the the argument that does come up a little bit that should be coming up more often and really is the voice of reason is exactly what you said. Hey, each to their own. We're allowed to like different things.
Right. And that's the thing that drives me nuts, that if my enjoyment of World of Warcraft is predicated on modern WoW, and I'm never going to log in to classic WoW, what does it matter if other people are enjoying classic WoW? Like, it doesn't affect me in the slightest. That doesn't change my game experience at all. I'm still having fun. I'm still playing the game. These other people can go have fun and go play the game. And like, not to get on my soapbox here, but I'm going to get on my soapbox here.
Go for it.
I feel like this is such a huge problem with video games, and not just video games, but like kind of nerd culture as a whole, like comic books, whatever it happens to be, is that if you enjoy a specific thing, it's almost like you have to be a gatekeeper towards other people enjoying that thing. And that doesn't have to be the case. Like, you can enjoy your thing. Other people can enjoy their thing. That's okay.
You're 100% right. And sorry, mate. Do you mind if I borrow your soapbox for a second?
No, go ahead.
Oh, thank you.
I'll
step right up here. It's a point that also comes on, you know, I won't go too far down this track, and I don't want to get too sort of, deep on this one, but it also comes up outside of video games as well, just in terms of social media and our interaction and the way in which society is developing that way, where I've seen a lot lately coming up on Twitter and things like that, where people, even though it's been said for many years, sort of a bit more of a movement behind it, going like, hey, if you have something negative to say, you don't have to say it. Like, life's not about running up to people and saying, hey, oh, you like that thing? I hate that. It's like, yeah, thanks for the fucking input, buddy. Just say nothing. Yeah, just keep it to yourself. I 100% agree with you, and that's how it should be.
Like your enjoyment of a thing should not be predicated on making someone else feel bad about their enjoyment of another thing. Like it's not a binary equation. It's not, if someone else is enjoying this thing, that your thing becomes less enjoyable. We can all enjoy our thing. That's okay.
Now, mate, if I can, appreciating that obviously you've got the family and everything and you won't be playing Classic, if we can play a little bit of a hypothetical game here where, let's say I like to joke about, if we had the DeLorean from Back to the Future, if we've got some way to take you to an alternate reality or whatever. If I could take you to a world where, heaven forbid, the family wasn't around. Let's say we got single Chris back on the scene, right? Maybe Destiny from the strip club is around. Who knows, but in a world where you don't, that's right, making it rain. If you're in the world where you're on your own, you're doing your own thing, you got all the time in the world, and Classic comes out, and let's say you might be intrigued by it. If you were to roll around and do it all again, would you do the same thing? Would you go with your troll rogue, or would you try another class? Is there something else that always intrigued you?
Fuck no. I would go undead rogue.
Oh, sorry, you'd go undead rogue.
Yeah, because undead had the freaking free PvP emblem. Like, oh, hey, crowd control, that's something that doesn't exist. I'm undead.
You mean like the Will of the Forsaken? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Did you regret rolling a troll for that reason?
I don't, because it was also kind of like a badge of honor that, like, I'm playing this shitty class and race combo that really no one is playing, but I'm gonna try to make it work.
Yep.
And then what was funny is that around when Burning Crusade came out, is that all of a sudden Troll Rogues became, oh hey, they get the attack speed buff. That's really good for raiding.
Yep.
So I was like, yes, my time has come.
Yeah, finally, my time to shine.
Yeah, but yeah, it was a long period of time up until that point.
All right. Well, If I can sort of take a little bit more of a trip down memory lane with you in terms of the content that you experience in vanilla. Now, given that, so many people here are waiting for classic and we're going to be going through that 1 to 60 experience again, did you have any favorite, dungeons or anything or areas from the game that you really look back on fondly?
Probably my favorite recollection was actually farming Eastern Plague Lands. Just the undead kind of farm area. Like, I had the spawn timing down where I could go from skeleton to ghoul to skeleton to just making the circuit around the farm, and occasionally some alliance member would pop up. And I'd be like, okay, are we going to fight, or are we just going to kind of stare at each other and not fight? But yeah, no, that was probably, just kind of mentally zoning out and just farming experience and items.
Excellent. Now, is there, what I do with some listeners is, I ask them to recount a particularly funny memory if they happen to have one. And I hate to put you on the spot. I haven't prepped you at all for this, but in the, the trials and tribulations of learning how to play the game, we all did silly things, or perhaps you had a funny interaction with someone once upon a time. Is there any one memory that you look back on and go like, what the fuck was I thinking? Or, I've got a funny story for you about this time we were raiding so-and-so. Anything that springs to mind?
Yeah. So I've got 2 stories for you.
Okay.
The first one is not World. It's actually Ultima Online.
Oh, go for it. That's fine.
Yeah. So, 2 of my friends, my high school friends, they were big into Ultima Online, and they would play at my friend's house because he had a cable connection. Because back then, your connection speed determined how good you were at the game. And so I had always played a fairly benevolent player. In terms of I wouldn't attack other players, I was a good guy. And I tried my hand at being a PK when I was over at my friend's house, and I zoned into a dungeon. I waited for someone else to zone in, and I cast 3 fireballs, and I got panicked and I ran away. And I mean, as a, 13-year-old, 12, 13-year-old, it was, your adrenaline starts pumping. You're like, oh my god, I'm actually attacking another person. It was some intense shit.
Yeah.
So from that point, about, God, what would it have been? Maybe 7 years later, I'm with one of my WoW buddies from my guild, the Flying Hellfish. This would be in Wrath of the Lich King. So they'd done the rogue rework where, you had what was the health restore I think it was in the combat tree, where you could use the ability to restore X% of your max health based on how many combo points you had when you used the ability.
Oh, you're pushing my memory now.
No, this is way back. I don't expect many.
Well, this is horrible because I played a rogue and I should know.
Yeah. It was something like that. Maybe combat reflexes. I forget what it was. Anyways, we were doing, me and my buddy, we were doing 2v2 arenas, just fucking around. No expectation of winning. I was me playing my rogue. He was a paladin. I think it was a ret paladin.
Mm-hmm.
And we came up against a holy paladin, death knight combo in the sewers of Lordaeron.
Right.
So within the first 30 seconds, my buddy just gets zeroed out. Didn't even have time to pop Divine Shield.
Mm.
He just gets fucking crushed. and so I'm like, well, now it's 1v2. This might be tough. And somehow I managed to kill the other team's paladin, and then I kite the Death Knight around long enough in combination with the health restore ability and Envenom to where he physically could not get close enough to hit me. I'm kiting him around the boxes.
I'm picturing like the Benny Hill music playing as you run around.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was by far the best PvP moment in my life. And I end up winning this 2v1 that I should not have won.
Right.
And so comparing the two of those, where in Ultima Online, I was like, oh crap, my fireballs aren't working, I have to run away. Versus, 2v1, Death Knight Paladin, I got this. Looking back on it, it's like, I had learned so much. Like I had played in so many different scenarios and interacted with so many different people that like I felt comfortable actually competing against these people. And to me, like that is the lasting memory that I have of World of Warcraft, where it was like I grew, right? Like I got better at playing games.
So a listener asked a question. Listener Palfurus had this question for you, and it might correlate well with that answer that you've just given. And it might seem like a relatively, I'll wait for the answer actually before I surmise what you might say. But they asked whether there were any parallels between playing football and playing World of Warcraft. And you just talked about getting better at the game. Is that something that's sort of, amongst many that you found yourself at home with World of Warcraft, that you felt familiar with your sporting, life as well?
So I will say, I have never felt my heart beat as hard as I did during a PvP match.
Really?
Compared to being on the football field.
So all the lights, all the eyes watching you. So we talked earlier about, the 50,000 people in the stadium watching if you're going to, screw up a punt perhaps, or, if, all the millions of people watching on TV, game on the line. You're saying that nothing compared to a PvP match.
No, wow. It was like it out on the field, because it's weird, because when you're out on a football field, you almost have this like remove from the fans because they're 30, 40, 50 yards away from you. Whereas when you're in a PvP match, like it's you versus the other person. And especially if it's open world PvP. Yeah. Like if they jump you out of nowhere, it's like, holy shit, what do I do? Like this came out of nowhere. How am I going to survive this situation? And so I will say that I have not had as much adrenaline going through my system in a football game as I had during a 3v3 arena match as Rogue Mage Priest versus, someone else in like the 1900 bracket. Like that shit was for real.
Wow. If I can ask, on the football angle, do you recall at all your most pressurized moment or heart-beating moment in the NFL?
Yeah, so that would be, was it 2009, 2010 versus, New Orleans in the NFC Championship game.
Yeah, of course.
Yep. So Reggie Bush was the returner, and I had some history with Reggie Bush.
Oh, what was that?
In college, he had returned a couple, and then a couple of years earlier, I want to say it was 2000. It was either 2008 or 2007. He had returned 2 touchdowns against me on a Monday Night Football game. Probably should have had a third, but he tripped himself up during the return. So when we got to the NFC Championship game, we're playing in New Orleans. Like this was after Hurricane Katrina. So, I mean, like it's the stadium. I think the decibel level during the game, 115 decibels, 120 decibels.
Yep.
Like that's like jet engine.
Yep.
Like levels of sound. I can't describe how loud the sound was, but I go out there and I punt, and I want to say it was near the end of the second quarter, and I've been having a pretty good game, and I hit this punt, and it just hangs up in the air. I'm like, he better fair catch that. Otherwise he's going to get freaking blown up. And he did not fair catch it. And he got blown up.
Wow.
And our gunner recovered it on the 6-yard line.
Mm.
So it's just like, that's the best I can do as a punter. Like, this is the most intense situation that I've ever been in. I performed. This is amazing. Naturally, we fumbled the ball 2 plays later, which was kind of the story of that game.
Yeah.
But no, that was probably the most pressure-filled situation that I had ever been in the NFL. But it was something where I felt like, as I was going out on the field, it was, I'm going to go do my job. I know what I'm doing. I've practiced my entire life to do this. I'm going to go do it.
Mm.
Whereas World of Warcraft arena matches, it was like, well, shit, is this other team, do they have raid gear? Like, how good are they? Like, what's the raid? You know, are they going to sap me out of stealth and just ruin our plans? So
it's an interesting point you raise, obviously, when you say, you know, intriguingly that, you know, you found, PvP a bit more heart racing than your time in professional sports. But that brings me to a point, and this is something that I think I've seen you be fairly passionate about in some of the things that you said online. And that's obviously the notion of eSports. And, you know, people talk about now the rise of eSports and, you know, the new professional athlete, if you will, and the pressure cooker environments that those people perform in. Could you, what's your sort of interest in eSports, if you could elaborate on that a little bit? And do you feel for the kind of pressures and lives that those people must lead in trying to be number one?
Yeah, no, I think esports has a very close parallel to traditional sports in terms of both the requirements in order to be a top level esports athlete, as well as kind of the path that esports is taking towards general acceptance. And what I mean by that is that right now, if you look at esports, it's kind of where the NFL, the MLB, the NBA was at during like the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. Yep. In that it's very much like it's regional organizations that are moving towards a centralized authority. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that esports right now is not learning from the lessons of traditional sports in terms of, okay, these are the things that lead to labor strife. How do we avoid that? And so when I look at esports, I look at how, okay, Blizzard, for example, last year, they had 12 Overwatch teams. Let's say the Overwatch teams are required to take from 6 to 12 players on their team. For sake of example, we'll say each Overwatch team had 10 players on their roster. That's 120 players. Mm-hmm. Minimum salary for an Overwatch team is $50,000. The highest paid Overwatch player was making around $150,000. Split the difference. We'll be generous. We'll say every Overwatch player is making $100,000. That's $12 million per year in terms of salary. Mm-hmm. Last year, Blizzard made from Twitch $45 million for the exclusive broadcast rights to broadcast Overwatch games. Mm. So you have $12 million going to players for salary, $45 million going to Blizzard broadcast rights. That's only one sponsorship. There were several other sponsorships going to Blizzard during that time. Where is the rest of that money?
Yep.
That's what I'm talking about in terms of esports not learning from the examples of traditional physical sports, in that eventually those numbers come out. The players are going to ask, wait a minute, we bring in X amount of value to your product. are we being compensated appropriately?
Yeah.
And I mean, like, Blizzard is not just Overwatch. You can also look at like World of Warcraft, the arena matches, right? Like those are kind of an esport. Like, I know they're broadcast at BlizzCon. I know they're a big deal. Like, it's okay if X amount of people are tuning in to arena matches and that's generating Y amount for Blizzard. Are those players being compensated appropriately?
Yeah.
And those are the things that lead to labor strife. Those are the things that lead to a breakdown of a sports league. And so that's where esports needs to be learning from traditional sports leagues, in that how can we avoid labor strife? Like, how can we avoid these mistakes that have been made in the past and continue building our brand and our product in a way that doesn't drive viewers away? Because one of the quickest ways to drive viewers away is to have strife between players and ownership, and all of a sudden there's no games being played and people are forced to pick sides, and it's like, well, why are we watching this? Why aren't we watching something else?
Yeah. It's a absolutely phenomenal point that you raised there, and you bring a lot of common sense to the argument for sure. And you're someone who has, lived through a labor strike, a pretty well publicized labor strike, of your own at the time that you were with the NFL. And obviously, if people aren't aware, they can obviously go away and Google, you had some very poignant comments at the time that the NFL was going through a high profile, labor crisis of its own. But knowing what you know about, professional sports, labor deals, as you've just talked about. And we know that many former athletes are now jumping on the esports train and buying teams. And like you say, it's like the 20s or 30s or 40s. Like, this is the time to buy low, get in on the ground floor. Have you ever been tempted to take any of the money that you earned through your career and get involved in esports?
So the only problem is that I earned punter money.
It's still decent.
I didn't earn QB money. So my investment would be minimal at best.
Right.
But no, it is definitely something where, had I earned, QB money, like if I had gotten that, $40 million, $50 million, $60 million contract, after taxes, that's $20, $30, $40 million.
Yep.
Like, I would look at investing in an esports team, because esports is growing. Like, it is showing that phenomenal growth that kids growing up, they're not watching TV. They're watching streams.
Yep.
They're watching Twitch. They're watching YouTube. Like, these are the channels that they are invested in, and that's what esports is on. And so, like, it makes sense to invest in those avenues. That being said, if esports does not learn from traditional sports, it's going to be a rocky road, even if you're an athlete investing in esports. And I mean, I was a history and political science major in college,
mm-hmm.
which taught me to look back at, okay, what has humanity done prior to now? What are the patterns that we are repeating up to now? And we're repeating the same pattern. I mean, if you look at Riot, if you look at Blizzard, if you look at Valve, like, they're repeating the exact same patterns that the MLB, the NFL, the NHL, the NBA have done from the 1900s up until our modern day. Like, they're trying to squeeze the athletes for as much as they can get, because they value short-term profits over the long-term stability of their league. But the problem is that that's not a long-term winning solution. And it's only a matter of time before esports athletes start talking amongst each other, start organizing and start unionizing, and figure out, hey, wait a minute, if I'm X-player on TSM. Say I'm a mid laner on TSM and I'm 50 grand a year, but this mid laner on Team Optic or Immortals is making 75 grand a year, but our stats are exactly the same. Why is that the case? Now you have labor strife. It's like, just learn from the past. It's not that hard.
Exactly. All right. Well, you've convinced me, Chris. Let's grab some of the $20 notes that we haven't handed over to Destiny at the club, and you and I will invest in 0.5% of an eSports team.
Yeah, that's totally voting.
Mate, if I can go back down, the professional sports angle a little bit and to sort of tail off with your time in the NFL a little bit, just to scratch the itch for the sports fans out there like myself. But if I can ask, well, tying in with Warcraft a little bit, what hurt more, the biggest hit you've ever taken on a field or missing out on an epic item?
That's a tough one. Oh man. So I've taken two hits that I would categorize as the biggest hits I've taken. One was in Chicago.
Yep. Where
it was 5 degrees on the field, probably -10 with wind chill. And I had punted the ball. Devin Hester had fielded it.
Yep.
He started off to his right, cut back to his left. I was tracking him down the field. When I tracked him back to his left, one of their linebackers, Brendan Imbadejo, he had taken like 15-yard run up to blindside me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I got blown the fuck up.
Wow.
I believe is the technical term.
Can I jump in at this point? Now, 2 questions from there. You mentioned Brendan Adebayo. I forget how to pronounce his name. That's the one. Now, was that not the same guy that obviously you got involved in the whole kerfuffle with initially with the Ravens?
Yeah, no, he's a great dude.
Yeah, I can imagine, but that's the same guy, right?
Yeah, no, he's the same guy.
Oh, how funny. So he's responsible for one of the biggest hits you've ever taken. That's so good.
Yep.
That's fantastic.
It was great because you're the guy who almost shattered my forearms.
Oh, wow. And then obviously, you two, I'm sure, struck up a thing.
For LGBTQ rights. Yep. Yeah. No, the same guy.
Oh, that's fantastic. And also, sorry, second question. That didn't happen to be Hester's record setting run, was it?
No, that one happened in, I want to say 2011?
Okay.
2011 or 2012. Yeah,
okay.
No, this was back in like 2006, I want to say.
Right.
It was when Hester first entered the league, and yeah, lucky me, I got to face him twice a year. Yeah, hooray.
So what was the other hit?
So the other hit was we were playing at Jacksonville. I punted the ball. We were punting right, hit pretty much a perfect ball. It was about 50 yards, 4.9 seconds hang time. Between the numbers and the hash, for whatever reason, the coverage team decided they were going to cover left. And so the returner just takes off down the sideline.
Yeah.
Because no one is covering the right side of the field. And I'm just like, well, here we go. So I run over, and right as I'm, what I think, about to make the tackle, the gunner to the right side, he had peeled back after kind of jamming our coverage guy at the line. So he was coming up the sideline. I was going towards the sideline. The receiver was running down the sideline. Mm-hmm. The jammer hits me with his helmet in my solar plexus as I'm about to dive towards the returner running down the sideline. I get sent probably 3-4 yards in the air and then land on the ground. Returner runs past me, eventually gets pushed out of bounds. It's by the Jaguars sideline.
Yep.
I I got the wind knocked out of me.
Yep.
Like, so when you take a hit in the solar plexus, like you literally can't breathe.
Oh, I played rugby my whole life. I know.
Yeah. No, it's a scary sensation because it's just like, oh shit, am I dying? And so I'm lying on the ground, probably a yard or two from their sideline.
Yeah, they're all going nuts.
And one of their guys who hadn't even dressed for the game, like he's in sideline clothes. Like sweatpants and sweatshirt, he comes over and does the Friday routine of "You got knocked the fuck out." And in my head, I'm thinking, "You're not even playing," but I'm still trying to like catch my breath.
Yeah.
And our trainer comes running out. He's like, "Chris, are you okay?" He's like "What are you knocked out of me? Can't breathe." And he's like, "All right, you'll be fine in about 30 seconds."
Wow.
So yeah, 30 seconds later, I'm okay. But yeah, that was definitely the second hardest hit I had taken in my career.
Well, I'm going to say that's definitely, you described it pretty well to the point that I'm like, oh God, I can almost feel it. But, yeah, I'm going to say that's going to hurt more than losing out on items for sure.
No, sorry. I didn't even get out to losing out on okay. Losing out on the item. Yep. So we're progressing through Burning Crusade. We finally take down Illidan. The main hand glaive drops.
And you've already got the offhand, right?
And I'm like, no, I didn't have the offhand at the time.
Okay.
I really want that glaive. It looks so cool, and it does so much damage. But the rogue ahead of me, who had been in the guild for several years, had more DKP. I'm just like, God damn it, he's getting the glaive. So I will say physically that didn't hurt as much as the Chicago or the Jacksonville hits. Mentally, probably about equivalent.
You needed the Jacksonville guy there anyway in your bedroom in his street clothes going, "You got knocked the fuck out."
You got knocked the fuck out. No glaive for you.
Exactly. Oh gosh, how funny. Look, if I can press you a little bit further, just while we're telling fun stories about the football days, I would ask sort of, not necessarily having to involve yourself, but anything you might have sort of heard along the way or any hearsay or anything like that. What is sort of, to give people a bit of insight maybe, what's perhaps the craziest story that you ever heard, whether it's on the field or off the field, involving your time in the NFL?
Probably the stupidest story.
Yeah.
Was we had a defensive lineman, not that bright. So generally when we were in the locker room as special teams players, so me, my long snapper, and the kicker, we'd kind of hang out around this table in the middle of our locker room, and we'd play dominoes and just shoot the shit, do whatever, kind of pass the time. And so we had this defensive lineman, and he was a 6th round pick, thought he was going to be, the next whoever, but really wasn't that good.
Yep.
And I want to say it was either his 2nd or his 3rd year. Me and my long snapper were sitting at the table, we're playing dominoes, like just hanging out, like not worried about anything, trying to get through the day. And this defensive lineman comes up and he says, "Man, I got this email from Target, and they said they were getting me $5,000 if I sent them $1,000, but I haven't gotten the $5,000. And I was just like, holy shit. You just got Nigerian princed. Like, how do you not understand that $5,000 from Target was never going to be a thing?
Oh, wow.
Like, people don't just give you money out of nowhere.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, no, it was, oh man, I can still remember it.
There you
It was
go.
amazing.
Now, Chris, I'll sort of tail this one off with, we chatted a bit before the interview started, about, Blizzard and BlizzCon and things of that nature. And I read about you that you were actually quite the Blizzard fan. It's not just a World of Warcraft thing. You actually do, have quite the affinity for Blizzard games. And, please do tell me if this is true. You're also a big fan of their older stuff, which I am as well, like the Lost Vikings and Rock and Roll Racing, which is one of my favorites of all time.
Yes. Oh, I played so much Rock and Roll Racing as a kid.
Oh, join the club.
I think it was a combination of you had the upgradable cars
Yep.
/ hovercrafts, but the tracked car was the best. I didn't like the hovercraft corner very well.
Yep.
And those homing things were shit. I like the missiles were the best.
Yep.
But I think it was a combination of the cars and then the fact that they had George Thorogood.
Oh, the music was the best part. It was, and the 16-bit renditions of those songs are fantastic.
Right, like of Born to Be Wild.
Yeah.
Like I was just like, I'm just gonna keep fucking driving around this track while Born to Be Wild.
I vividly remember.
In the background.
Yeah, I still vividly remember like starting up all those races and like, you know, Born to Be Wild or Paranoid starts up. It's so good. But who'd you roll with? Did you go Ivan, Cyberhawk, Jake, Snake? Who was your person?
No, I had to go Ivan. It was.
I was an Ivan guy as well.
Yeah, no, it was once I figured out the code for the Lost Vikings. It was like, no, sorry, not Ivan. Olaf.
Oh, right. Yes.
That was the Lost Viking. Cause I was like, I can be this fucking like Viking dude driving this race car. Like I don't even remember what the code was, but I remember if you entered it, like you got Olaf, one of the last Vikings.
Yep.
And that was. Oh man, those are SNES days. Those are so good.
Oh, I remember them very fondly. But with that love of some of Blizzard's products, and obviously you're a Cali guy, even though you played football for Minnesota, but you grew up in Cali, high school, college. You're living back there now with the family, and with BlizzCon being essentially in your backyard. Just tell people, have you been to BlizzCon before? Have you gone and experienced it all with the fans?
Yeah, so I went to BlizzCon, I think it was 2 years ago. And it was a really cool experience. Fun. Like, when I went, they were having the WoW Arena Championships. So you could like sit down and watch those happening. And then they had, I want to say, I think Will Wheaton was the main presenter.
Yep.
For the central stage. And, yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. Like I went there with one of my friends and it was just a really cool experience. That being said, since I have kids, tough to get away from the kids. Like that's
even with it just being down the road.
Yeah, it's one of those things where take advantage of it when you can.
Yep.
Because once you have kids who are in school and have after school activities and all that, like your time gets filled up really, really quickly.
Now, I mentioned to you, I'll say again for the listeners' benefit, I told you that I'm making the big trip over from Australia for my first time, likely my one and only time, this sort of once in a lifetime trip. What would you say I could come to expect for my first, and perhaps only 2 days at BlizzCon? And do you have any tips?
Parking is going to be terrible. The food trucks are pretty good. Other than that, just wander and enjoy. I mean, Blizzard does a really good job of putting on a solid, production value. They give you a lot of stuff to look at, a lot of interesting things. I know when I went, they had the new Hearthstone. It was like the Murloc adventure. Was it the Temple adventure or something like that? Right. When they introduced Helmet, I think it was Helmet Nessingwary.
Yep.
But yeah, no, they should have a lot of cool stuff to check out and just try and yeah, just enjoy it. Like It's very hard to beat the weather in Southern California.
I can imagine.
That's one of the main reasons why I live here.
Are you much of a Diablo fan at all?
So I was a huge Diablo fan. On Diablo 2. I played Diablo 3 and I was not a fan.
Yeah.
Because it felt more like World of Warcraft than it did Diablo.
Right.
And if I wanted to play World of Warcraft, I would play World of Warcraft. Like, from Diablo, I want a Diablo experience. All that being said, if you have not played Path of Exile, sorry Blizzard fan people, Path of Exile is freaking amazing. Like, it's a free-to-play game. The developers designed it around what they wanted the Diablo 2 experience to be. It's really, really freaking cool.
Yep.
The skill tree is Final Fantasy X's Materia Grid. No, sorry, not Materia. Final Fantasy X's Sphere Grid. The skill ability is Final Fantasy VII's Materia combinations, and it's just a beautiful mess of a game. Like, if you want to relive Diablo 2, go check out Path of Exile.
You'll have to remind me. I'll tell you something fun about Path of Exile once we're off stream and sort of away from prying eyes. But following on from that, basically, I'll wind it all up, Chris. I just want to say thanks so much for being here. It means the world to me to have, someone such as yourself just take time out on a lazy Friday night and speak to the show. And I'm sure the thousands of listeners worldwide of Countdown to Classic really do appreciate you coming on and sharing your stories. You've been an absolute blast to talk to. I'd love to pick your brain again in the future, but I just want to say a really heartfelt thank you once again for coming on the show.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me on. Like, this is something, it was an integral part of my adulthood, I guess you could say. And, for all of you that are looking forward to playing Classic again, please go out, have those Terran Mill Hillsbrad battles, like, back and forth. Just, you're not fighting for anything other than the pure joy of fighting. And just kill each other, because that's what vanilla WoW was about. You were Horde or you were Alliance, but you found someone else on the other side, and you're like, I'm just gonna try to kill that other person. That's really what it was. It was this brand new world. Anything was possible.
Absolutely, and we're all looking forward to it so much. Well, look, Chris, I'll chat to you very quickly off stream, but everyone listening on stream, thank you so much for checking in. I'll go offline now, and you'll all hear this in its polished version on Monday morning. So look forward to seeing you then. So goodbye, everyone, and Chris, I'll hit you up in 1 second. Let me just click this stream off.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
And that's everything from that chat with Chris. And I just want to take the time to say thank you so much again to Chris for affording me the time for that chat. It's so nice to see interviewees take the leap of faith with me and agree to being on the show. And hopefully they all enjoy their time talking to me as much as I do talking to them. If you want more of Chris, then you can find him over at Twitter at Chris Warcraft, all one word. As you can hear, Chris was very easy to get along with and is obviously a very intelligent and affable guy. So I do encourage you to throw him a follow over there and keep up with him and his thoughts on things. But with all that out of the way, it's time to get to the show's regular segments. And now it's time to angry up the blood a bit with a short dose of anger management. In anger management, I invite the listeners to submit some of their angriest thoughts about World of Warcraft. And today we hear from listener Capgren, who tells us this. I've always played Horde and have leveled up many characters, but for the first time ever, I'm leveling an Alliance character on a private vanilla server, and now I'm a level 55 Paladin. And what the hell? What's wrong with the Alliance's outpost strategy and Flightmaster placing? For starter zones, it's all well and good, but as soon as you get to contested territories, its outpost planning is on crack. After Darkshore, I got to Ashenvale and Astranaar, and it's okay, but that's all as far as Flightmasters are concerned. The Horde have 2 in this zone that are very strategically placed by comparison. Moving on to Stone Talon, there's 1 Flightmaster for the Alliance at the outmost northern location, far away from everything. So, I hiked down to Desolate, Nigel's Point. Again, it's at the edge of the zone, far from absolutely anything. Whereas the Horde have got 2 outposts here. Feralus, oh my god, hey, let's build a stronghold out in the ocean where no one goes. I hardly knew this place upon playing Alliance. And yes, the Alliance have got that Flightmaster at the edge of Thousand Needles, still, again, far from everything. When you want to go to the Scarlet Monastery, it's a never-ending trip, past a Horde capital city. For the Horde, this could be compared to Gnomeregan, but not quite, because the Horde gets a teleport to Gnomeregan instead, because it would be stupid to have to travel half a continent by foot and past a rival faction's capital, right? As for the Badlands, there's not even an outpost or a Flightmaster. Come on! Stranglethorn Vale, one of the biggest questing zones, and the Alliance don't have shit in this zone, except that awesome, not, outpost to the north. I bet this is not the only flaw of Alliance planning. Finally, another thing. As a paladin, it seems as though I can only level my skills on 1 continent. Really? The Brotherhood of Light doesn't care enough to send a trainer to Kalimdor? Now, I hope I'm wrong and that I just missed Flightmasters and trainers, but nonetheless, when Classic hits, I'm rolling Horde once again. And thank you so much to Capgrin for that angry submission. But now with that done, let's cool things down a bit with a little trip down memory lane. In Memory Lane, Countdown to Classic invites the listeners to submit some of their fondest or funniest memories from back in the day. So today we'll start with this one from listener Toll. So this is the situation. Tolaroke, a level 60 human warrior with barely pre-raid best in slot gear. Me, piloting my first vanilla character ever and on a private server named Project Azeroth. No vanilla raid experience, little raiding experience at all. 36 individual names on Discord and in the Molten Core raid, and every one of them shut up when I pinged my push to talk. I wasn't the official guild raid leader. He was mysteriously absent that night. I wasn't an officer. In fact, I was the second rank from the bottom, just above noob we just recruited. Yet there we were, pressing into the lair of Ragnaros with our ragtag band of vanilla initiates. I was researching the bosses on my phone while tanking trash pools. Somehow, by the grace of the elements, we were doing pretty goddamn well. The server had little progression at this point. Only one guild had made any headway into Molten Core, and they were 7 out of 8, struggling to coordinate enough to kill Ragnaros and unable to complete the hefty requirements to enter Onyxia's lair. Seriously, that attunement is straight jacked up. By the end of the night, as if blessed by the heavens, we had downed 5 out of 8 of the Molten Core bosses. Once word had gotten out that our Pee-wee guild had become a competitor, the shit-talking began. First 6 out of 8 are easy mode, not a challenge at all until the last 2 bosses. We heard it all, but we were unfazed when the next night rolled around and we had managed to scrounge up enough of the materials needed to summon the fabled Ragnaros, just in case we got that far. We quickly dismantled Gar, a boss that we had previously skipped after a few lackluster attempts, as having a couple of tanks and a warlock missing made him nigh on impossible on the previous night. From there, we set off for Major Domo, with many dismissive quips in Discord about how difficult this was going to be. A quick break, followed by a lengthy overview of the boss and our strategy. Always phrase the boss as a problem and your strategy as the solution. Alright, here we go. I pipe over Discord as the pool goes off. The result? It's a complete fucking mess. People are dead that should never even take damage. I'm tanking an extra mob at one point. Yet, through sheer force of will and determination, we complete the event. You can't actually kill Major Domo. And roll about in the fatty loots. Then, whispers can be heard like an excited crowd getting jazzed up as the underdog gets up one more time, and I say, let's head over to Ragnaros. Admittedly, I made it off like I was AFK following one of the veterans because I had no idea how to get to Ragnaros' chamber, but had to keep up airs like I knew what I was doing. Come to think of it, I did a lot of that throughout my time as the raid leader. The night before, I expected to be raid led instead of doing the leading, so it was an utter mess. Tonight, I was prepared with orange note cards covered in furious scribbles about the bosses we would be facing. We went over the fight and cautiously got in position. My hands were trembling, but the show must go on. We pulled and again there was a frenzy and some deaths, but as the pseudo enrage was about to hit the second talk, now, actually, I'm not sure if that's a typo, if that's supposed to be tick or tank, but I apologize if I've read it wrong, which would have led to an inevitable wipe. Sulfuras was buried in the lava where Ragnaros once stood. Shouts rang out into Discord. I woke up everyone in the house and scared the dog. Once the revelry had died down, loot was distributed. Then the calm set in and we realized there was still an hour left to our raid time. Once the loot was out, the mages dropped portals to Ironforge and I said, well, we may as well see how many we have, before beckoning everyone who was not attuned to Onyxia's lair to leave the raid. A minute went by, then another, then another. Only 2 people left and we had 34 brave souls crowded on one boat headed towards the final stop. At this point, everyone had settled into their roles and became comfortable with the fact that we were complete badasses. When we got to the big old lady, and I don't blame you if you don't believe me, one of the other rival members will have to verify it for us, we killed that fucker in one goddamned attempt. Nothing short of a miracle. In a single stretch of 2 days, we had gone from the guild that barely held on to raid-worthy status to the top dog on the server. Eventually, Rival went on to collect 1 Thunderfury, and yes, I was its wielder, and down 6 of the bosses in Blackwing Lair, before everything went properly to shit. It's the greatest vanilla story I've ever heard, and to me, the greatest memory to be made in my vanilla experience. Next we have this one from listener Galabrant, who says this. Now it's a little bit of a long one, but it's a great submission, so here we go. Hi there, Josh. I'm a big fan and I've been listening to your podcasts in a strange order, but the last one I've listened to was the one where you managed to help former vanilla friends to reunite. It made me so happy to hear these old friends reunite like this, so I was hoping you could perhaps help me with a much smaller story of vanilla friendship. So, first off, I've been following World of Warcraft since 2003. I was an adamant but not very skilled fan of Warcraft 2 and Warcraft 3, so hearing about a Warcraft game where I get to play as my own hero was very exciting. The sad thing is, despite me following the game almost religiously at that point, we know that WoW's original launch was not a global launch, and I'm South African, so I still followed the game right up to its launch day, but alas, I could not play it. In stubborn hope and disbelief, I physically went to any store that sold games at that time in the hopes of someone having the damn game. Sadly, my childlike hope was for naught. I surrendered and continued to play Warcraft 3. Skipping ahead, a family friend was going to England and the Netherlands for a holiday in Q1 to Q2 of 2005. I was 13 years old back then. I gave her a piece of paper with World of Warcraft Collector's Edition written on it as neatly as possible, and I begged her to bring me a copy from overseas. Obviously, I was unaware of how rare collector's editions were, but I tried my luck regardless. Eventually, she came back and she gave me the standard copy of WoW. I remember remember the plastic bag it was in and the receipt dealt with British pounds. I could not contain myself. My parents were pretty skeptical of using credit cards on the internet because it's wizardry. But I managed to redeem my 10-day guest pass and start playing the game on the 4th of July 2005. My greatest gaming memory of my entire life. My parents saw the clear joy the game brought me in those 10 days. So once the time was up, my parents caved and gave me a subscription. I remember them saying, "Just 1 month, okay?" And I responded with something like, "Yeah, fair enough. I'll probably be done by then." Pompous little kid. I remained subbed from July 2005 until mid-cataclysm before I unsubscribed for the first time. Still not done with this mammoth game. Skipping ahead again, I was a typical ADHD kid. I loved everything and every class in the game. For the rest of 2005, I don't think I leveled further than around level 25. I always got distracted by how cool the different classes were. However, on this particular day, my older brother was playing a dwarf hunter named Glock, and he recently made himself some tiger's eye goggles with engineering. It was the first headpiece I'd seen at that point, so I quit my character at that time, I think it was a dwarf warrior, and I immediately rolled a dwarf hunter, and I named him Scope, because I wanted my name to be relatable to my awesome level 20 plus big bro. It is on this character that I made my first and only true vanilla WoW friend. I was busy with the hunter quest where I needed to tame a crag boar when I noticed there was a dwarf priest nearby who was being attacked. I can't remember if they were Wendigos or snow leopards. This was a very long time ago. I decided to help the guy out and I helped him kill the enemies. He was so happy that I helped him and he was so friendly. This was the first time I actually felt compelled to talk to someone in WoW. Please bear in mind that this is also my first online gaming experience. We ended up questing together and we had a blast. He gave me a tour of Ironforge and he was super knowledgeable of the game. I can't remember if the priest was his alt or his main though. At this time, I was on a lengthy school break and I played with him every day, even going to Loch Madan and Westfall together. Sadly, when school started, I couldn't play so much anymore. So the next time I logged on, I saw he slowly began to surpass my level. One day, I saw on my friends list that he was level 30, and I was a lowly level 21 or something, so I couldn't really play with him anymore. The last chat I had with him was in the wetlands, where he was questing there, and I desperately wanted to join him. I could do some of the early quests in wetlands thanks to my mange claw bear I tamed, but those quests quickly ran out, and I began to hold back my friend. One day, he never logged back on again. In that time, I re-rolled to a dwarf warrior, and I actually managed to reach level 60 in 2006, but I never saw him online again. I specifically transferred his character name to my new mains friends list, but it was for naught. It's a long shot to find this player because we didn't share a guild together or do serious content as a team, but it's my one and only friend interaction back then. It was my first introduction to the community-driven magic behind WoW. It gave this absolute online gaming noob an opportunity to make friends from around the world. So that's my long story and I thank you for reading it. This dwarf's priest's name was Psycho, and he was a knowledgeable player in the EU region, and I strongly believe that it was on the Spinebreaker realm. I chose the realm back then because it sounded cool. I've tried to find him on battle.net forums, but to no avail. So this will be my last attempt to find him. If I don't find him, that's fine. I will still remember him as an inspiration in WoW, as he inspired me to level my dwarf warrior to a higher level. So if you're out there, Psycho, it would be an honor to level with you once more. I've definitely improved since then, I promise. Thank you for taking the time to read this, and I hope you and your awesome audience will have an amazing time in World of Warcraft Classic. And thank you so much for that memory lane. I really do hope that you find your friend Galabrant and that maybe, who knows, they might even be listening. Stranger things have happened on the show so far, so fingers crossed for you. But that's memory lane for the day, and with that, I thought we'd just touch quickly on a bit of listener feedback that I received through the week just before we go out. And this is an email from listener Coldry, who tells us this. Josh, just some of my thoughts on the future of Classic WoW. I just listened to episode 76 and it got me thinking about what I thought was going to happen. So when Little Miss Gnome and her temporal discombobulator turned back time, she did not realize that she would alter the past/future. What that means is that we would start off just like it did in 2004, but that we can't progress like we did back then with all the expansions. All the old devs you've interviewed said they are shocked Blizzard could find anyone to recreate vanilla World of Warcraft because they aren't developing anything new. This would explain how they were able to hire people for the job. Having the original future of World of Warcraft altered with the discombobulator made it so they will be designing new expansions. Hopefully it'll be in keeping with the vanilla WoW feel of the game, but with all new content after vanilla. Also, Alan Adham would be leading this team in his new position at Blizzard since he had such an impact on vanilla World of Warcraft. With all of this being said, I believe they will keep all of this quiet until they figure out if vanilla World of Warcraft will be a success or not, and I believe it will be a huge success. I could see them having a new cinematic trailer showing something about the temporal discombobulator altering the past/future, which would leave it open-ended, stating that they could end it with vanilla and not make any new content, or that my theory is viable, but taking the time to wait and see if vanilla is successful before they have to say anything. I know this is all a huge stretch, but everyone has their own ideas on what is going to happen, and this is mine. As always, love the show, keep up the good work, sir. Hope you have a blast at BlizzCon, can't wait for your updates on events there. And thank you so much for that feedback, Coultry. And look, it is an interesting theory, and everyone does have their own theories on exactly how exactly Classic is going to be introduced to us, and also what's going to happen later down the track. Now, I'm not so convinced that we are going to get new expansions. It's an interesting thought. There's no doubt about that. I definitely sit in the camp, though, that thinks we are far, far, far more likely to get a Burning Crusade Classic and a Wrath of the Lich King Classic if Classic is successful, and I think that would really depend on the breadth of that success with this Classic project. So, whilst I think it's fun that we have these two different camps on a 1.13 or future expansions, and it seems to be that listener is saying that we actually might get total new expansions, and several of them perhaps if Classic is a hit, and it's it's almost extending a little bit beyond 1.13, but I think that's fun to definitely ponder on. I just personally can't really see it happening. My stance, which I've said before on the show, is that whilst I think a 1.13 or a new vanilla expansion in an alternate timeline, if you know what I mean, is certainly an interesting prospect, I don't think that Blizzard could pull it off in terms of re-establishing that vanilla feel. We've talked about the lightning in a bottle moment back in the day, 15, 20 years ago almost now during World of Warcraft's development. I think there were certain people involved with certain mindsets at the time, chasing goals, being scared about, the success of the project and not knowing what was going to happen down the road. And then just it blew up out of nowhere. I just think you can't recapture that. And they all had certain design principles that have the ethos at Blizzard has changed a bit over time. Whilst I would want to see new vanilla expansions, I would only want to see it if they could capture that vanilla feel. And I don't think they can, hence I don't want 1.13 or future expansions. I'd really just rather go into TBC and Wrath or what have you. So that's my personal take on that particular matter. If you disagree with me, write into the show and let me know. I'm always interested to hear listeners' takes on that. And by the way, that listener touched on BlizzCon. Yes, I will be at BlizzCon. I am flying out of Sydney this weekend. I am very excited. I'm very, very confused about what I'm about to see. I've never been to a convention at all about any kind of Comic-Con or anything like this, any kind of games convention. I am really, really, really looking forward to it, and I can't wait to meet hopefully some of you at BlizzCon. And yes, I will be producing content from the event, and please do look out for Countdown to Classic to give you updates as the event is going on in the lead up, during, and after. So I'm really looking forward to that. The show will be a little bit different during that time. I hope you excuse me if it's not quite as polished and refined as perhaps you are used to on the show. I won't have as much time to write scripts, to really, really put a solid, well-formed thought together. It will be a bit more reactionary, as some of you may be used to with some YouTube videos, but I think it's still important to get a say in. So I do really look forward to getting back to you after playing the demo and hearing from some of you. I'll be calling some of you whilst I'm at BlizzCon at night, gathering your thoughts on the demo and reporting back via the show. So that will be fun too. Now, that's the show for the day, everyone. Countdown will be back later this week as well to play you a number of listener calls that I took over the weekend, all about things like paladins, hit tables, reputation grinds, and so on and so on. But just before I let you go, I just want to shout out to some very dedicated patrons of Countdown to Classics. So, shout out to Flozy B, Palfurus, Permadrunk, Rarebit, Romani, Tsunami, The Anton, Wilson Ma, and Velarco. Thank you so much for your phenomenal support of the show. Countdown to Classic would not be the same without your support. Also, a big thank you to supporters Bossman764, Hurlbert, Good Kisser, Myrtle Banks, Purgatos81, Tim B, and Zudamos as always. That's it from me for the day, everyone. So, signing off from Down Under, have a great Monday.